Hi everyone, Jules here from Tarot Adventures with Jules. I am about to have a live with Ben Jolivet from Tom Benjamin Tarot. Ben is the fabulously talented tarot reader and writer of Tarot on Earth and Your Tarot Toolkit. I cannot wait to chat with him about his fabulous books. They're so wonderful. Um, yeah, Ben is also a teacher and has hosted a number of amazing tarot classes, Lenormand classes. He has a wealth of knowledge that he's very generous about sharing, and I'm really excited to dive into these fabulous books with him. So I'm just waiting for him to join here. And then, let's see here. Just a second. Yeah, so Tom also, Ben, excuse me, Tom Benjamin Tarot, but it's Ben Jolivet. He's also created a fabulous Tarot de Marseille deck, which I would like to chat about later as well. Okay, starting momentarily. Hi, Ben. Thanks so much for
Hi,
joining me.
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Just adjust my volume here. There we go. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for coming and chatting with me about your books. I just did a little short intro just saying that you are the reader and writer and creator behind Tom Benjamin Tarot, and that you had written these two fabulous books, which I can't wait to chat with you about. I just did a reread of both of
Oh,
them
nice.
over the past couple of days, and I was reminded of what a fabulous resource they are for all things tarot, and I just really appreciate all of the care that you've put into not just the content, but also how you've structured everything. I think you'd mentioned in one of the books you have a background in adult education.
Yeah.
Um, so evident because everything was just structured so fluidly and in such a lovely, comprehensive way. So I really appreciate that. What's your beverage, by the way?
Oh, it's just iced coffee. My
Oh,
my
nice.
go-to. Yeah.
Yeah, I have that as well.
I love your mug.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, my husband makes a mean cold brew, and we have a nitro keg that we use as well. So this is nitro cold brew, and we do homemade almond milk. And then
Oh,
I just discovered this amazing cookie dough syrup from
mm,
a local coffee shop, and it's good hot, but somehow cold, it's even better. I don't know how that
mm.
works, but it's pretty
That
fabulous.
sounds
Yeah. So
amazing.
cheers.
Cheers.
So I know you went into this a little bit in Tarot on Earth, but I wanted to ask you your tarot origin story. It's always so fun chatting with folks about that live.
I love that. Yeah, I love that story. I mean, I love those stories. Grew up Catholic and was very like terrified of anything divinatory. When I
Yeah.
was, I don't know, like 12, maybe some friend of mine like read my palm and was like, "Okay, you're gonna have a heart attack at like 35." And then,
Oh my goodness.
yeah, I didn't get over that until I turned 36.
Yeah.
Um, but weirdly, ironically, I was in a production of Godspell when I was like 19, and a couple of the folks in the cast were like, we were at like a chain, like a TGI Fridays,
Yeah.
and they were doing like tarot readings over like, cedar plank salmon.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was so, I don't know, something kind of like went doink, and like I
Yeah.
was okay. And I have no idea what deck it was. I've been looking for it ever since. I remember the Hermit really vividly, but I can't remember anything else. And I've
Yeah.
never, that would have been like 1998.
Okay.
So no idea. But yeah, so then like we had a discount bookstore which was like in an old mill in my hometown, and there was like one book on tarot, and I kind of like snuck it in between other
Yeah.
books I was buying, and I got it home, and there were no pictures of the cards in it. It was just like
Oh, no.
a square where you would place your card. Your so
Okay.
so then I was like, well, I guess I have to buy a deck because I need to see how they connect. So I did.
Yeah.
I bought the purple and gold original Rider Waite tarot pack. And I have such a vivid memory still, such a visceral. I was listening to Nelly Furtado's first album,
Oh my
and I was
goodness. Yes. I'll
I was
never
laying on my bed.
do that.
Oh my God. I still associate the music on that record with tarot. And
Yeah.
I was just so like, I don't know, visceral. I remember seeing each of those cards and sort of like feeling such a connection, such a powerful something.
Mhm.
And then it was just it was all uphill from there. It was just like That first book, which was it was by Emily Peach. I can't remember the name of it. I referenced it a lot because I found it was very esoteric, very difficult to understand.
Yeah.
But then I found some more easy to understand. I found Rachel Pollack's 78 Degrees of Wisdom pretty quickly, and then it just became kind of part of just part of a thing. It was one of those rare things where it was like I I was happily not great at it right away and
Yeah.
would still work. Like normally if I'm not good at something right out of the gate, I just throw it out. But with this, I was like I'm willing to work.
Yeah. It's amazing when you can find those things that capture not just your interest, but your motivation as well. Like
Yeah.
I'm similar that way where I get really excited about something and then I'll just like reach burnout point. I'll get to a certain level of competency. I think it's maybe human nature. And then I'll be like, oh, I've learned a lot enough, you
Yeah.
know? But like you with tarot, I love that I can continue to learn until the day I die, and there'll always be something new to discover, some new perspective. I'll pick up a guidebook from a random deck and there'll be like one sentence
Mm.
and it'll blow up my understanding of that
Yeah.
particular card in a way that I hadn't looked at before, right?
Yeah.
So there's something about this that has definitely captivated me more than my usual attention span. I love that. I love that that's true for you as well. So then how did you progress from, well, not progress, but I know you've got your YouTube channel and you're so generous with all the content that you share and deck reviews and all kinds of things. It's wonderful. So what were the steps that you took to actually writing a book? I mean, that's something that so many folks in the tarot community aspire to, that and creating a deck, which I know you also have done. So what was that process like of having all these ideas and then finally getting them down on paper? Because this one was published in 2017, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. It was a long journey. It was, I read all the books and, did all the readings when I was in my 20s. And
Yeah.
I don't know, I think at a certain point in my 30s, I felt like, I don't know, there was something hollow or not, um, I don't know. I guess the word I would use, from a learning standpoint is I felt like I had plateaued.
Yeah.
And I actually put the cards down for a couple of years because I just didn't feel like I was getting much out of them. And then um, I randomly picked up a deck and sort of fell in love again. And in that space, kind of YouTube had sort of arrived, and so I went looking on YouTube for videos of people reading tarot and just finding demos of readings, and there wasn't much back then,
Yeah.
which would have been, I think this was around 2012
Okay.
potentially. Um, and so I made a bunch of videos, like a handful of videos, but no one was really watching, and I didn't really understand how you got I still don't really understand how you get views and likes, but
Yeah.
um, so I did that for a while, and then never, it just wasn't really getting anywhere, and then took some more time off, and then in that space, kind of Tarot Tube blew up.
Yeah.
And when I came back, there were views, and there were people watching the videos, and so I started doing it. And around that time too, like Lenormand was kind of blowing up in
Yeah.
the tarot landscape. And until recently, like I just couldn't connect with those cards. And still I find that they are only really useful to me as a Grand Tableau, but I really like the Grand Tableau. But what I was getting annoyed by at the time was like, oh, Lenormand is so great because it's clear and it's precise, and tarot is mushy and spiritual. And my response was like, no, we asked tarot to do that. We asked tarot to do those things. And so that's what it's providing to us. But I felt strongly, and I feel like I was right in retrospect, that tarot will do what you ask it to. And it was just for me about learning how to ask it to do something clearer, something more
Yeah.
down to earth. And that became Tarot on Earth. So it was sort of a journey into looking at how I read and looking at other techniques and traditions and cartomancy and fortune telling, and also coming to terms with the idea of fortune telling not being a bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and um, and that was like a deep dive in myself. And then basically what became Tarot on Earth was sort of my journey
Yeah.
into that. A lot of things that I did in that book were things I did, and other things I wish I had done.
Yeah. Well, this is 100%. I wish this had been around when I was first dabbling into tarot because I got my first deck, I want to say probably 15 years ago, but I didn't really pull it out in any real sense. I just remember the first significant reading I did was the day that my second child was born, my daughter, and she was 7 weeks early. And I had no idea that I was going to be giving birth that evening. And I
Mm,
pulled out the deck and I pulled a couple of cards, and it was from the Mystic Fairy Tarot, and I gave it to her a couple of years ago before she's now 14 and wants nothing to do with anything that I'm into. Right? Very practical, very down to earth, very intuitive, but like needs everything to be, rational and understood. And anyway, so I pulled out the deck and I did a, the Celtic Cross for my friend who was over, and then I did the Celtic Cross for myself. And the two things that came out of that reading were the two things I desperately needed but didn't know at the time. I needed to trust my intuition, and the thing I was most afraid of wouldn't be as bad as I feared.
Mm.
And without missing a beat, I said, I'm so afraid this kid's going to come early because I've been under so much stress. That was at noon, and she was born at 8:37.
Oh my God.
So it was like, but I just remember sitting in the hospital the next day after she was born and thinking, oh my God, like that was just what I needed.
Yeah.
And it kind of blew my mind because I didn't have as much faith in myself and my intuition, or let alone, pieces of cardboard that were going to give me some kind of knowledge, right? And it's amazing. But at that point in time, there was so little available in terms of decks. Like this was kind of like, it was like a fairy themed, and then you'd find like there was a few other things, but I had to find this like random little metaphysical shop in Calgary, Alberta, of all places, and it was kind of tucked away. And
Mm.
I appreciate that there's so much more diversity in terms of the types of decks that are available. Like there's something for everyone. I'm not even sure where I was going with this. Oh yeah, outside of the fact that I wish that this had been available, because this is exactly what that rational, ordered side of my brain needed. Like I've kind of found my way to my spiritual side by learning and researching and like getting through that more methodical, kind of practical, down to earth. And the way that you've structured this book is so helpful because it's like a step-by-step guide through exploring the tarot. And it feels very much like a really accessible on your own pace course as much as it is a book, like the way that you've got the building blocks set up. Like it's really fantastic. And I love too, like I started with RWS, as I think a lot of people did, and I love it and it's close to my heart, but I love the Tarot de Marseille approach because the use of numerology takes away that prescribed story from all of the pip cards so that it becomes freer somehow. Like the Three of Swords isn't so charged, the Nine of Swords isn't so charged. There can still be those elements in the reading, and the way that you can cross-reference not just cards within a suit, but also cards across suits. So you look at the fours through all four of the suits, and what are the connections? What are, is that idea of grounding and stability? Like that was so fascinating to me going through this and not having much experience with Tarot de Marseille to be able to access a new relationship with the cards. I really appreciate that you did that. And I also love, I'll stop rambling in a minute, but I love that you started with the pips as well. And what you said about the pips are doing the real work of tarot. Like, I feel like the major arcana or trump cards get all the glory, right? Like they're the big players or the big hitters. Those are those big fundamental shifts that are happening in your life. But like, if we're lucky, our life isn't a soap opera and every second day isn't a major catastrophe. So it's lovely to look at the small things being actually the big things, those day-to-day concerns that are very real and very much a part of what builds our lives, right? So I really love that you made that such a central focus of this book, and the idea of numerology, light and shadow elements, all of the things that you had to say about ethics kind of blew my mind, because that whole idea of like no third-party readings and like, oh, there's certain restrictions around like health or around romance or around like different things. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, like the whole ethics component. I mean, you laid it out beautifully in here, but I think that's something that is an important part of reading, but can also, I feel, almost work you into a corner if you're not careful. Like, it's almost impossible not to do a third-party reading because everyone influences your life to such an extent that if you're having an issue with your 14-year-old, for example, real life example, she couldn't not be part of that reading because she's part of that experience, right? And you really laid that out beautifully in this book, and it shifted how I see that, and I feel like it's allowed me to step away from being quite so regulated. So like, what was your experience with that transition? Because I think you've written about that too.
Yeah. Oh God, that was a journey too. And I think so I came up, when I was learning in the late 90s, early 2000s, like the American Tarot Association was kind of the, I don't know what the word is, the vanguard, I guess. That always makes me think of the Nixium cult. But the vanguard of like tarot, and they were all about ethics, which I understood to be a thing of bringing credibility back to card reading, which I'm all about. But a big thing in that was rephrasing client questions to something
Yeah.
that was ethical. And I didn't like doing it because,
Hmm.
well, I didn't know why I didn't like it for a long time. But then over time, I started to discover, I guess, or I started to understand that there was something arrogant in that,
Hmm.
something that said, well, I know better about what you need than you do as a reader.
Yeah.
Um, and your concern about this relationship or this other person, you know, in your DMs or whatever. We didn't have DMs back then, but you know what I mean? It felt messed up. It felt weird. It felt gross.
Yeah.
Um, and then I started exploring other systems, and I realized that like most divinatory systems don't care about that kind of ethics.
Yeah.
Um, and so I started to, I guess it was like it was coming to grips with my own understanding. Like I wanted tarot to be a little sexier. I wanted it to do things
Yeah.
like that. Um, and then I thought, well, why shouldn't it? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like playing card divination, palm like all of these things we'll talk about, and sort of non-European centered traditions also are fully willing to go there.
Yeah.
Um, and that took me down a path of kind of understanding why the perception of a fortune teller as a fraud was so prevalent. And shockingly, it turned out to have a lot to do with misogyny, classism, and racism, you know?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like who were the diviners? It was usually women of
Yeah.
color, often queer people or non-binary people, and
Yep.
usually people who didn't have the means, to be independently wealthy, although they would be consulted by the wealthy and then villainized for it. Even Madame Lenormand Mademoiselle Lenormand was famously jailed.
Yeah.
And she's kind of one of the more privileged fortune tellers in history.
Hmm.
So, kind of, as I was dealing with my own understanding of untangling my internalized misogyny, my internalized racism, etc., I realized, like, oh, there's some very complicated things here that I need to address
Hmm.
in myself, but that also have a lot to do with the idea of what is considered ethical
Oh,
in tarot. And
so true.
so that was a journey in untangling it, and it had a lot of really important ripple effects too in my own understanding of the world. But it was
Yeah.
really that. It was like I didn't like the arrogance of rephrasing questions, and then once I addressed that, it became, oh boy, there's a lot of messed up stuff that comes out of
Hmm.
esoteric traditions.
Oh, 100%. Even looking at all of there's a lot of baggage around the Golden Dawn and, marginalization of Pixie Coleman Smith and like all of those things. Like there's all these elements to that that are heavily problematic and,
Hmm.
just in terms of divination in general and, gendering of tarot and the hierarchies in tarot. Like there's all of these things that more and more creators and writers are starting to deconstruct and disassemble and opening up, In Search of Tarot and Nick from In Search of Tarot and
Hmm.
Charlie Cliff Burgess from The Word Witch. Like both of them are so fabulous at unpacking all of that and
Yeah.
completely reframing it. And, the Fifth Spirit guidebook, what they wrote in there fundamentally shifted not just how I see tarot, but how I see myself, my identity, my place in the world. And I don't know about you, but I think that is one of the things that I get most excited about with tarot. Like it is such a fabulous
Hmm.
tool to be able to unpack where you fit in the
Yeah.
world and how you see the world and start unpacking some of that unconscious bias, maybe conscious bias, inherent racism, misogyny, homophobia, all of these things that I've had to unpack over the past years and kind of it brings this really powerful mirror up in front of your face and
Hmm.
kind of forces you to look at things in new ways or to shift those mentalities. Like I find I can avoid something like the plague and then I'll pull the card that's like, no, you're not. Like, this is what you need to face up to. And sometimes
Yeah.
seeing it sitting there
Yeah.
in full color right in front of me, it's like, ah, shit, now I got to deal
Yeah.
with it. Right? Like, it's really powerful. But yeah, it's such a gift in that it does have that capacity to make us more aware of ourselves and the world around us and these limitations that we put on ourselves based on our perception of the world and how much that needs to shift,
Mm.
right? Like it's really quite
Yeah.
powerful. I love all of the exercises that you included in here too. I'm a stickler for not writing in books. I've been like this since I was a child, so it's all blank.
Yeah.
But I have done all the exercises, it's just like in separate notebooks. Um, but I love how thorough it is, and I love too how much it's allowed me to look at cards in different ways. Like the RWS is great in that there's a story and it's very beautifully illustrated, and you kind of go through, this journey, not just through the major arcana, but the minor arcana too. But I love that, like the Nine of Cups, for example, that's often seen as like the wish fulfillment card, and it's this like generally positive card. Although I would argue no card is inherently positive
Same.
or negative; it just is, however it's interpreted. But I love there's something you were writing about the nines and about how it was like a cycle of like nearing completion or coming to the end of something, or maybe it was a Ten of Cups, yeah, because it was that completion cycle. So you think, oh, Ten of Cups, that's great. It's like family harmony. It's like the couple holding hands and the family and the rainbow. But sometimes that can be not such a good thing, and water can sometimes
Mm,
overpower in that idea of emotions and everything else. So when you take away that prescribed narrative and you look at it through a numerological perspective and the idea of cycles and completion juxtaposed with the suit, it can have so much more meaning, right? Like it really can transform how something looks and how something comes together in a reading. And it's fascinating, and I love that so much. So yeah, thank you for that.
yeah, that makes me happy.
I just got so much out of this book. Like I can't recommend it highly enough. I read it for the first time a couple of years ago, or a year ago or so. I worked through it actually with Lisa, a friend of mine who is actually taking a few of your courses. She's based out of Nova
Oh yeah.
Scotia as well. Yeah, and it was a lot of fun. But it's so nice to come back to something that you haven't worked with for a while and like rediscover it. It's really powerful. Are you familiar with Beau of the Fifth on YouTube?
What I didn't quite hear that. Which was it?
Beau of the Fifth, he shows up like he's this redneck, right wing Yahoo, huge beard, trucker cap, everything. And when he first popped up on my feed for recommended videos, I was like, "Are you kidding me?" But he actually is like an ex-journalist and worked with like training military in the past, and he's now done a complete about face, and he works with politics, and he's like incredibly well researched, and like he takes things and he cuts it down to really like easy to digest, straightforward, but it's like a complete pushback. So it's like the antithesis of what you think
Mm,
is going to happen when you see the visual image. And I think he actually started the channel as a joke because he was with some of his reporter friends and they actually heard him speaking with his southern accent. And they're like, "Oh, you have a southern accent?" And he's like, "Yeah, I do." And then started the channel as a joke. And it's actually become this really great liberal bastion of like unpacking the alt-right and
mm,
then rise into fascism, current politics and everything else. But one of the things he always says about different things is like, tell him what you're going to tell him, tell him what you told him. And I was just saying to Dominic earlier when I was like describing the books, like I feel like I'm fangirling here. I'm so sorry, but I'm so excited. But that's exactly what you've done with these books, and that's what's so powerful. It's like you lay out what you're going to structure. I mean, you're a teacher, you know that this is how you structure things, but it's just such a great way to reinforce information and to teach and to really have things go in, have things be presented in a way that people are actually going to absorb, right? Um, and I, as a reforming type A who's constantly pushing through and trying to do things yesterday, I appreciate how many reminders you had in these books to take a break and to slow down. Like I'm reading through and I'm like, oh yeah, I should probably do that right now. So yeah, that was great. And then, so this one came out in 2017, and then you published your tarot toolkit in 2020. So what was your journey in between those books? What was the motivation for the second book? Because to me, it feels like a very beautiful follow-up, almost like the intermediate to advanced follow-up to Tarot on Earth. But what was your thinking around that, and how did they kind of lead one from the other? What was that writing process like the second time?
that's a good question. I think that in my mind, I just wanted to write more about tarot. But then what I try to do with my classes and my channel and my books is to do something that isn't out there already, or to find like a niche, that will help someone who's looking for that thing. And there weren't, to my knowledge, there's very few books that are sort of intermediate to advanced tarot books.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no intention actually of self-publishing your tarot toolkit. I wanted to see it released, but the feedback from the publishers that I spoke with was that there's no market for a intermediate or advanced book, which I
Yeah.
mean is a thing, right? To me, partly it shows that there's a disconnect between mass market publishers and real readers, you know what I mean? Tarot readers, not just the sort of like fly by night hobbyists, which there's nothing wrong with. But if you publish a book and you don't have card meanings in it, or you try to get published without having card, they don't want it.
Yeah.
No, so I said, well, I still want to do this, so I'm going to self-publish it too. And in both cases, it let me do exactly what I wanted,
Yeah.
and I didn't have to fight with anybody, or fight to keep a certain word or a point of view.
Yeah.
And I really love that they come from me.
Yes.
But I wish they could reach a broader audience, but I don't want to have to sacrifice the core of them. But there is a
Mhm.
market for these things.
Mhm.
It's just not going to make as much money.
Yeah.
And so part of it, I guess, is part of the journey for me has been recognizing what's my niche, right? Because you
Yeah.
can't be liked by everybody. And in fact, I'm tolerated by some and disliked actively by others because, I'm a loudmouth. Um, but I also believe strongly there's no one right way, so that my role is to sort of say, here's what's helped me. Let me try to find a way to do something that may help you enter. Like, everyone needs an access point,
Yeah.
and that's what I try to do, is find access points for folks, in my
Absolutely.
classes, in my books. So this was like, how do I what's the book I wish that I had when I was at that plateau phase? And that
Yeah.
was, and also, how do I sort of record everything I'd learned? And I'd changed even since I wrote Tarot on Earth. I talk a lot about reversals in Tarot on Earth, and I don't use reversals even with Marseille anymore.
Yeah.
I just evolved out of it. There's nothing wrong with them in any system. I just didn't. I found suddenly I didn't need them anymore.
Yeah.
Um, so it was partly that. It was partly really wanting to share and take away the pain that students feel,
Yeah.
because it's lonely, it's tough. I've taken a lot of classes, I've read a lot of books, and they're all very passive. And that's how books are written. That's how classes are taught. And it's not the most effective way to learn. Um, so,
No, I totally agree. And it's the publishing industry is so weird because I've got a friend who's shopping the book right now, and it's been really frustrating because she has to prove that it's similar enough to other things to be
yeah.
publishable, but yet it has to be completely unique as well.
Yeah.
So it can overlap with anything else, and yet it has to overlap, and it's this really weird kind of gray area in between. And it's like, I don't know, like having the autonomy and freedom to just say what you want to say and to break the rules if you feel
Yeah.
like you want to break them, or just structure things in a way that makes sense to you and obviously makes sense to many of us as well. Like there's this real disconnect between what people actually want and what the publishing industry thinks is going to make
Yeah.
money, right? Which is really unfortunate. Um, yeah, I was making a bunch of notes. I have a bullet journal, and I went through and made notes on all the different Lenormand pairings because I'm starting to build kind of my understanding just with pairings with different cards. And I went through and made some notes from Tarot on Earth on the elements that you had mentioned. And then I was reading through your tarot toolkit, and I just saw the subtle ways in which some of those definitions had shifted. And it was really cool to kind of follow along with your progression and your understanding of what those things meant over just the course of a couple of years. And it made me recognize that it's important for me to leave space for that for me as well, where you can look at something that you did a few years ago, and it's not that it's wrong, it's just different based on your
Yeah.
understanding at that time, right?
Yeah.
So that was helpful. Yeah. And again, I love that you titled the minors the minor majors in your tarot toolkit because they are important,
Yeah.
right? And that the chapter that you had on measuring progress, like you had a whole breakdown of what the outcome of a reading should be. Like, as a lifelong people pleaser, I'm always looking for that feedback when I give someone a reading. Like, are they liking it? Is it resonating? Is this working? And then if someone's not very vocal, it can be kind of intimidating,
Yeah.
right? But I love how you measured progress on like clear, logical answers with a corresponding size and scope to the question that's being asked. And does this reading give clarity and insight? And like, if you've ticked all of those boxes and then you fulfilled your requirement. And as a reader, that's so reassuring to know that it's not dependent on someone else's outside response to you. As long as you've done your due diligence in how you're presenting that reading, that's what you need to do, right? And it's because sometimes there's going to be, as you pointed out so beautifully in these books, there's going to be times when there's information that's presented that someone's maybe not open to or not receptive to, or it's challenging to them. It's not that it's not accurate information, but holding that glass up, especially when it's coming from someone else, is often very difficult,
Yeah.
right? That's, I think, simultaneously why people come for tarot readings and why they dislike them sometimes. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like it's tricky. Yeah.
Humans are weird, and
Yeah.
Yeah, humans
Uh,
are weird. We're weird. We're a weird species.
we definitely are. And I love that this book also has your well-tempered toolkit with like a side-by-side building, step-by-step building blocks for like how to take things to the next level. And your section on spreads was fantastic. I'm fascinated by it, and I want to explore more the 9-card spread because that was something we talked about in your Lenormand class
Mm.
as well. And just that whole idea of reading horizontally, reading vertically, looking at how everything plays in together. Like you mentioned the grand tableau earlier, and I'm still working my way towards that just because the whole idea of trying to incorporate all of these cards, many of which I'm still learning the meanings of together, feels intimidating. But then there's so much richness and information to be had from that. And even within that 9-card structure, as you talk about the Celtic cross and how it can be a little bit challenging, but you also have your own new Celtic cross that you have on your website, which is kind of a tweak on the original in a way that makes it feel a lot more intimate and immediate and relevant to not just a general but a more specific perspective, which I really appreciate. And also, what you had to say in here about the reality of reading professionally was fantastic and much needed. Like, I actually took readings off my website a little while ago because I was just feeling so disheartened because I had a few bookings but not a ton, and then with the algorithm stuff, it's hard to get seen and get out and make connections with people, right? So that was really helpful to look at the reality of the fact that a lot of people who are doing tarot have something else that they're doing at the same time. Yeah, no, that was super helpful. So yeah, what was the difference when it came to writing these two books for you? What shifted in your perspective? And I hesitate to ask if it was like easier or harder, but like what aspects of writing for both of these books did you find more challenging and that had a bit more flow?
The first one was like, who am I to write a book about this stuff? You know, it was the imposter syndrome thing. The second one was the pandemic. It was in the middle of the I'd started writing it, and then the pandemic came and destroyed everything. And so finding a way back to caring about the future,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
was the big struggle there. But I'm really blessed that when I'm writing about something I'm excited about, it comes pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think it's the way Rachel Pollack talks about the magician, where you kind of become a conduit for
Mm-hmm.
for magic, for spirit, for whatever you want to call it. And when I'm in the zone, it just sort of pours forth. But it takes a while to get there. I have to sort of store up a lot of struggles, and that's one reason why my YouTube channel hasn't been as active with new content, because it's like I have to store that stuff up. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, no, it was really just the pandemic kind of changing my perspective about, what's important and the world, and, what's predictable too,
Mm-hmm.
has been another big thing that I talk about in kind of all my classes. I don't have good answers for them all the time, but I like to talk in classes about like, well, what's realistically predictable?
Yeah.
A pregnancy, which we're told not to read about, is actually a pretty predictable thing because it's chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
Marriage, on the other hand, is totally unpredictable. So
Yeah.
I say to classes a lot, whether people on TV have a bad reputation for always being wrong, they're not always wrong. They're 99% of the time they're right. It's just the times where they're wrong are the big times.
Yeah.
But those are the most unpredictable storms.
Yeah.
So it's sort of understanding what prediction is, was also part of the thing too. It's like, what do we do? What is tarot? What is prediction for? Was
Mm-hmm.
part of that.
Well, it's almost down to that human nature aspect of you can get 10 compliments, but it's that one negative
Yeah.
piece of feedback that you get that you're going to hang on to for dear life. So it's like you
Hmm.
can do 10 good for someone, and then that 11th one will maybe fall flat for the person for whatever reason, and that's what stands out, right? And then
Hmm.
everything gets covered with that same cloth, right? It's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, honestly, tarot kept me sane through the pandemic. I'm not even lying. Like, that was my line through all of the lockdown and everything else. Like, I'm so glad that I was involved in health and wellness uh, prior to the pandemic, and I extricated myself in November of 2019, and thank God I did.
Yeah.
And I started my tarot account at the same time. I finally came out of the tarot closet, so to speak. And I'm so like the timing of that was so synchronous, serendipitous, I
Hmm.
guess is the word for it. Um, Yeah, I'm really grateful for that because it really was a lifeline for me and just a community that I found, and
Mm,
everything else is really amazing. I mean, say what you will about Instagram, I'm still really grateful that the
yeah.
community exists and that everyone's, mostly still here and interacting and everything else. Like
Hmm.
it's really great. Um, so what was the most challenging aspect of the books in terms of like what was the publication process like? Self-publishing. Like I think both of the books are available in print format on Amazon. I think your tarot toolkit is available digitally on Amazon. What was the process of publishing, like self-publishing, like for you with that format?
Mm. That was interesting. So there are complex ways to do it, and there are easy ways to do it. And being crazy, I chose the complex way to do it.
Yeah.
Um, I'm very lucky in that I have one of my best friends is a professional editor, and who, for free, which I would normally never accept, but we're practically siblings.
Yeah.
Edited both books for me, and so
Oh,
that
that's
gave
lovely.
me, yeah, it took a lot of stress. There's still typos. I mean, you're gonna find typos, but really helped me with clarity, and the layout process was interesting because I had to teach myself InDesign
Oh, okay.
uh, for
Yeah.
Tarot on Earth, and that was a journey.
Hmm.
And then I found Affinity Designer, which is easier to use and much lovelier and cheaper. And
Yes.
I did your tarot toolkit with that. It was really just sort of getting the prints and proofs right, and like dealing with. I'm not a graphic designer. I'm not an artist, but I wanted the
Hmm.
books to look, professional. I wanted them to like, if you saw it on a shelf, that you would say, "Oh yeah, this looks legit."
Hmm.
So I had to sort of teach myself a lot of things that are not naturally good at, because I just couldn't afford to pay a graphic designer to do it for me.
Yeah.
So that was really the challenge. For all the bad things about Amazon, I will say their self-publishing platform is very user-friendly in a
That's
lot of
awesome.
ways.
Yeah.
So it's a tough thing, right? Because I recognize that Amazon's a problematic company.
Hmm.
But two things can be true at the same time, and one is that self-publishing is really making it possible for folks to get work out there that the mass market doesn't want for whatever reason, because there's a small group of established gatekeepers.
Yep.
The downside is that there's no sort of infrastructure to market the book. The sales, are the sales. They creep up and they creep down.
Hmm.
They go through phases where I'll get like a bunch of stirring around it, and then nothing for like a
Yeah.
year. Um, but they're out there. They're easy to, if I want to do a second edition, it's easy to do. I recouped my investment relatively quickly, which was
Good.
really just sort of paying for the software I used to lay it out, and
Yeah.
the ISBN numbers, which you have to
Hmm.
buy. But other
Oh,
than that, yeah.
oh, I didn't
Um,
realize that. So you actually purchased the ISBN for each of the books that you published. That's
yeah.
really interesting. I
And
mean,
you
it
have,
makes sense.
yeah. And you have to do a different ISBN for each version. So if I were to do like a hardcover or an ebook, you need another
Okay.
ISBN.
Oh,
Um, yeah.
interesting.
And
Oh,
the reason there's no ebook version of your tarot toolkit is because of all the tables. It's just really a nightmare to format
oh
on a Kindle.
my gosh, it would be. It
Yeah.
absolutely would be. Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating because I don't really know that much about the publishing industry, not having written anything. I've got friends that are going through that process, so I've learned a bit from them.
Mm.
But yeah, and I actually have the Infinity Designer, both for graphic design. I'm not a designer either, but I've had a few things that I've needed to tweak with like my logo and different things, and then also the writing. I'm putting together a cookbook of all of the recipes that I had on my food
I love
blog.
that.
So yeah, while also being painfully aware of like some of those recipes are international and I don't want to get into appropriation territory. So I'm basically putting it together as something that I'm probably going to give to friends as opposed to ever marketing it. But at the same time, um, yeah, that tool was really helpful, having Affinity to be able to kind of format all of that.
Mm.
So thank you for sharing that back in the day because that was what had let me know that that
Oh,
was
I love
available. So
it.
yeah.
All their products are great. Sorry.
Oh yeah, they really are. And you have a background in theater as well, right? I have an MFA in theater history, and I went to a musical theater school in New York and did my BA, um, Bachelor of Arts in theater and drama and everything. And yeah, so you're still a playwright,
Oh,
correct?
oh God, that's a big question.
Sorry
So
to
my
give you
MFA, no,
the
it's
button.
fine. My MFA is in playwriting.
Oh,
And
okay.
I loved grad school, even
Yeah,
when it was tough, I
me too.
loved it.
Yeah,
I love I love writing plays. I'm good, it's rare that I'm like brave enough to feel like I'm really good at it. Like I'm a
yeah,
good writer.
yeah.
Um, the
No, you're not a
theater
writer. I can vouch for that.
the theater is in an interesting space right now, full of toxicity and all the things that we see in a lot of other industries. I am struggling to understand my relationship to it right now.
Mhm.
In my work and in wanting to, be a people pleaser and in wanting to get my work done, I've seen a lot of gross things. I've accepted a
Yeah.
lot of gross things. I've said a lot of gross things. And I've kept quiet a lot about a lot of gross things. And I don't have either the energy or the desire to uphold predators or abusers anymore.